Hey, and welcome to iWizard. So today we're going to be talking about Black Sun Rising. I thoroughly enjoyed this novel.
Me too. And this is book one of the Coldfire Trilogy by C.S. Friedman. So join us around the Coldfire for today's episode.
So welcome back. Here we are. I'm Jordan, and this is my lovely co-host, Nikki, joining us today. So again, Black Sun Rising. Let's get a little bit of context here. This is book one of the Coldfire Trilogy. It was published in 1991, so you got that good old-fashioned 1990s fantasy by Celia S. Friedman. The second book in this series is called When True Night Falls, and the third book, we've got that coming in the mail in a couple of days, is called Crown of Shadows. So this first book is technically called science fantasy. Some people just call it science fiction, and it does make sense why they would, but I would also say it's a little bit misleading. I would argue that this book has a background that is science fictional. It has some of the trappings of science fiction in that the story takes place in our universe in the far future. Humanity has explored space, has arrived at this planet in a spaceship, and colonized it. But once the author places us on this planet, the science fiction elements do recede into the background, and what you get is basically a traditional fantasy world. And so let's get into a little bit of a synopsis so you can learn what this story is all about. Over a millennium ago, Erna, a beautiful yet seismically active world, was settled by refugee colonists from far distant Earth. But the seemingly habitable planet was fraught with perils no one could have foretold. Shortly after the settlers arrived, they realized that seismic activity and a natural energy force called the Fae dominated the planet. Over time, the settlers would learn of the Fae's terrifying power to prey upon the human mind, animating the thoughts and emotions of all living things, drawing forth a person's worst nightmares and most treasured dreams, and bringing them indiscriminately to life. This almost destroyed the colonists until some humans figured out how to manipulate the Fae. Some humans, known as adepts, were born with a natural command of the Fae, while others learned how to become sorcerers. Now, 12 centuries after fate first stranded the colonists on Erna, mankind has achieved an uneasy stalemate as human sorcerers manipulate the Fae for their own profit, pleasure, and life extension, little realizing that the demonic forces which feed upon such efforts are rapidly gaining in strength. None of this is news to the beautiful but strong adept Siani and her apprentice Zen, especially once the forces of darkness come for her, threatening to take everything away that she's ever known and loved. Now, as the hordes of the Dark Fae multiply, two men, a warrior priest and a vampire, who are opposed in every way, must join forces to save Siani. Together they must embark upon a mission that will confront them with an evil beyond their imagining and a conflict which will place not only their own lives, but the very fate of humankind in utter peril.
So before we get into our likes and dislikes, I just want to say that I had not been planning on reading this novel. Jordan was going to read it and review it, and once he got a little bit into it, he was like, this novel is written for you. You would absolutely love it. And so he convinced me to read it with him, which is why we're doing this review together. And I did. I absolutely loved this novel so much. And for those of you that have already read Coldfire and are huge C.S. Friedman fans, I have excellent news. She is working on a novella, which is a Coldfire prequel. And so if you want more information on that, if you want to support Celia, please visit her Patreon page, which is patreon.com/csfriedman. I have links below to her social media. She has an Etsy store. She has a Redbubble store. So please check out the information in the description.
And if you do decide to support her, you can actually get snippets. If you end up enjoying this series, you can get snippets of it.
Yeah, there are perks.
If you pay her a certain amount per month, she'll leak out her writing to you, and so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a $25 tier where she'll read your writing, actually.
Yeah,
I think that's the adept tier.
The adept tier. You can actually send her your writing, and she'll go through it and
give you advice.
Give you feedback. Yeah, pretty cool.
Definitely cool.
So now let's jump into what we liked about this book. There's a lot to like here.
And I absolutely love the magic system. And I love how the Fae are connected to the energy of the planet. The planet's called Urna. And really, the major source of energy coming to any planet is from the sun. And so the most powerful Fae are the solar Fae, which is where that comes from. But planets also get energy from their interior, right? From internal heat, geothermal, radioactive decay. And so that's the Earth Fae. And the Earth Fae are strongest where you have volcanic activity, tectonic plate boundaries, where the Earth's crust is thinnest. This is Urna's crust, right? Where the planet's crust is thinnest. And then there's the tidal Fae. And that comes from the force, the gravitational force, which is the gravitational attraction from the moons, the tidal force, right? And there's 3 moons. And there's going to also be a bit of that attraction from the sun as well. So that's the tidal Fae. And then lastly, there's the dark Fae. And the dark Fae is a bit strange because darkness is just the absence of light, right? But it seems that there's this black sun. So maybe they come from the true night, and they're weakened by the solar Fae.
This, I am going to say, is the coolest, the most original magic system that I've ever read, ever, hands down. I'm not a huge magic guy. It's not that I don't like magic. It's just that my favorite type of fantasy is not the kind of Brandon Sanderson type fantasy where the magic systems are front and center. They're described in excruciating detail like you're in some kind of physics class for magic. Ordinarily, I do like soft magic systems. I want some mystery. I don't need to know exactly the way in which magic is manipulated by burning coins, and then there are all these different...
I love the rules because then I can try to predict what's going to happen and figure out how is this puzzle going to be put together?
Well, I just wanted to say, I get your point there, that this is the first book that I've read where the magic is front and center, and you're everything is described in excruciating detail, but I actually enjoyed it, and I thought it worked well, and it enhanced the story, and I felt like it was really original, and I liked the fact that it was a natural part of the world. So the Fae is this invisible force. It's neither good nor evil. It's just a natural part of the world. I guess you could call it magic. And so one of the interesting things is when the colonists first get to Urna, it takes them a long time to figure out what's going on. They arrive on this weird planet, and everything around them is strange. There are these monsters that are manifested and conjured. There are these demons and gods that that want to be worshipped, that keep appearing in these unpredictable ways. Creatures are evolving in strange ways. Nightmares are coming to life and things like that. And so what the colonists realize is that the Fae actually feeds on your unconscious mind and brings to life your repressed memories, desires, hopes, fears, everything in your imagination. If you imagine a vampire, that's going to be manifested by the Fae. So in fact, it's a little bit like Solaris, actually. You can control the Fae. Now, this is conscious or unconscious, so sometimes you don't even realize it's happening, but you can actually manipulate it on purpose, and so that's what the sorcerers do. But you can actually consciously control the Fae. You have wards and spells and workings, so you can tame the Fae and use it to your own ends.
And the reason that this is called science fantasy is because humans came from Earth to Urna in this book. And humans traveled 10,000 light years from Earth to get to Urna. So they were in some kind of cryo sleep for a while. And at the point when we're in the main story in the book, past the prologue, Urna has been settled for like 1,200 years. And the thing is, as Jordan said, fears manifest from the Fae. And when humans first arrived, like they had this great technology, right? They could reach the stars, right? And so the thing is, because of their fears and their dark thoughts that were manifesting, technology became very, very dangerous because when technology goes wrong, it goes very wrong. And so in order to preserve and protect humanity, there was the first sacrifice where the humans just destroyed all the technology they had, all the information, all the knowledge for protection from the Fae, essentially.
Sacrifice grants you a protection, and the bigger the sacrifice, the more protection, the more that you're protected.
And that becomes very important.
I love the fact that with this magic system, when a demon is manifested from your mind interacting with the Fae, those demons that are then manifested, like succubi or vampires or werewolves or anything that you're imagining, or worms that feed on people's brains, when those things come to life, demons in this world feed on human emotions. Some demons feed on pain, some demons feed on pleasure. And so there's this whole scene where there's this temple of pleasure that Kirill brings the main characters to.
Kirill's a demon.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's this forest in the book where the hunter, this vampire, lives in the center of the forest, and the forest is protected by a thick layer of fog so that there's no sunlight, because vampires can't be out in the sunlight. So solar Fae, once again, counteract the dark Fae, which the vampires are able to manipulate and command. And this forest has a really unique ecosystem in that the plants don't need to thrive then on sunlight. They thrive on the dark Fae, which is super cool.
And so there's a great moment, too, that I want to mention where the characters are talking. When they get there, the characters are talking about the unfathomability of old Earth. They're just marveling that there could be a planet so utterly unresponsive to life. So they're just looking back at Earth and just wondering what it must have been like to live in a world, to inhabit a planet that doesn't react to your every thought, that doesn't interact with your mind. So old Earth is just this world in which people just feel their emotions and think their thoughts and engage in these autonomous actions without really drastically altering the balance of anything in any meaningful sense. There's no Fae on Earth, so the environment kind of just leaves you alone. And yet, when you think about it, that's not actually true. On Earth, we have ecosystems, everything's interconnected, there's a butterfly effect, everything that we do has an impact on the balance of things, and that sort of thing. Everything we do has consequences. It's just that we can't always see them on Earth, and they're not always immediate. So it struck me when I was reading this book that Urna is just an extreme example of the way in which everything is interdependent. It's an exaggerated version of Earth, except that on Urna, it's possible to actually see the manifestations that come as a consequence of your actions. So this is like the fragile ecosystem of Earth. It's like the Gaia hypothesis taken to like an extreme. Gaia? Okay, Gaia. Sorry,
like
the scientist over here. This is a world in which we are extremely connected to the planet. We're a part of it. We're not separate from it. And everything, not only that we do, but that we think, has consequences on the balance of things. And, if you think negative thoughts, negative things are going to be manifested. And so there's this kind of karmic thing going on as well here in this book.
In this world, then, on Urna, there's not like replicability in science. If you do an experiment, it's not going to come out the same way each time because the Fae interfere. And so the Western religion has one God, and they want to get back to this point where like there is replicability, where they can reach the stars again, even after the great sacrifice. That's like the ultimate goal for humans to be able to thrive on Urna as they once did on Earth.
Right. Another cool thing going off of what you said is the rocks. The rocks are an excellent example of how evolution works differently, and evolution happens much faster on Urna.
Yeah.
Because of the way in which humans have interacted.
But not human evolution.
Not human evolution, but the evolution of life around humans. And it's really interesting how the human beings' perceptions of the rocks and the theories that they developed about the rock influenced how the rocks evolved. And the rocks eventually evolve into humanoid, human-like creatures because these early scientists theorized that they were the most advanced life forms and they were the closest things to humans.
Right.
And so human beings' theories and thoughts and ideas and prejudices and subtle discriminations are actually shaping the flora and fauna around them. And I think that's just really interesting.
And another thing that I loved in this book is Celia she definitely did her research. The geology descriptions were fantastic. Like, especially when you get down into the caves and she talks about like the sparkling calcite and it's like, oh, good. That makes sense. Like, the caves are usually made out of limestone, and she talks about erosion and deposition properly, even stratigraphy. And I was just like, oh, finally, she did such a good job with the geology. And I also really liked some of her olfactory descriptions in the cave too. She said something like miasma of adornment. I thought that was she had some beautiful descriptions in there.
Yeah, I totally agree. The world building was excellent. You could tell that the author did her homework. Not for a second did I feel like I was taken out of the book because something didn't connect. It's very much internally, logically consistent, and everything kind of fits together and makes sense.
So the prologue in this book was just absolutely amazing,
Awesome.
Absolutely gripping. I did not see coming what happened. Like, she totally got me. And so that just drew me in right away. Not to mention, like, I love Gerald. Tarot's just, like, such a great character.
He is a great character.
And, I always love me some vampire characters.
Nikki likes vampire men.
And on that note, so some word association here. So the title of the book, Black Sun Rising. So every time I think about this book, Black Hole Sun starts to play in my head. Yes. And I know that the Soundgarden Super Unknown album did not come out until 1994, and this book was published in 91. So, like, clearly Black Hole Sun had no inspiration for Black Sun Rising, and I don't think it went the other way around either, right? Doesn't legend have it that Chris Cornell was watching the weather and, like, misheard the weather or something, and that's where he came up with it?
Yep.
Anyway, so I was trying to, like, look around and get that first image of the black hole from the Event Horizon telescope that was taken in 2019, right? And so while I was doing that, I fell down this rabbit hole, or should I say black hole, and I found this really fun article from NewJersey.com, NJ.com, and I wanted to share a couple gems with you because I'm not on Twitter, so I miss out on some things, and I feel like I missed out on some stuff here. All right, so it relates the black hole to Soundgarden. All right, so Alex Van Luvender says, "You can't fool me with the Soundgarden album cover, government." It's just so good. Internet Jeff says, "Congratulations to the scientists from the Event Horizon telescope team on finding that Soundgarden album we shot into space back in '94. And then lastly, John Richards says, "Is it just me, or does this just released photo of a EHT black hole look a lot like Soundgarden's Super Unknown? Seems like Chris Cornell knew something, or maybe C.S. Friedman knew something first."
Yeah, you got the sun
Like,
here.
it's right here. And there it is. There's the black hole, right? Sun. I don't know. Just saying.
So while we're on the subject of what I liked, I did also want to mention a couple of other things. One thing that was big for me here is that this story has a real emotional intelligence, especially in the first half. The second half is a lot of action, but you really get a sense of what the characters are feeling, what they think of one another, what they're worried about, what they hope for, what their sort of overarching goals are. And that is something that I do think is lacking from a lot of modern fantasy, where it feels like characters are just running around RPG style, like some open world video game. I really like it when an author gets inside of characters' heads. And so what I think Friedman does a good job with is we get a sense of the kind of qualia, the inner sort of subjectivity of the characters. When Damien is meeting different people and looking around and thinking about people, he is really feeling his emotions. We really get a sense of who he is and who Siani is and who Gerald Tarrant is. And so I thought that was really well done. I also love that she doesn't over-explain. I also don't like when authors do that. The reading experience here is very gripping. It's akin to solving a puzzle, but not a frustrating puzzle. Like it isn't Steven Erikson. It's not going to be too difficult. The author lays out these breadcrumbs, and you can just follow them one breadcrumb to another breadcrumb, and she really leads you on. And the writing is almost like thriller novel writing. The story is told from a bunch of different perspectives, and so you get this kind of kaleidoscopic view of the story, and most of the chapters end on some kind of cliffhanger and that sort of thing. And so you get the story from the main characters' perspectives, dock workers, demons, even animals.
Yeah, the Zandu. Yeah, so the Zandu are so cool. They're kind of like goats, right? Like mountain goats, a little bit like white mountain goats with like these big rounded horns that are iridescent, so they like sparkle rainbow.
They're bigger than mountain goats.
No, they're very large.
Huge.
Like you can ride them like a horse. But I think that's what they kind of look like, except they have those rainbow horns, which is I think really fun.
And that's the thing that she does really well with the Fae, is that she uses the Fae to create all of these different types of creatures, and it really does feel original in that way.
And it feels like every perspective she gives you is there for a reason. Like she's not jerking you around.
Yes.
It all does come together in the end.
Yep.
And I absolutely loved the ending of this book. It was so satisfying.
Yes.
It tied up what I wanted it to tie up. And it gave me some things I didn't even know I wanted or needed. And the epilogue was one of my favorite chapters in the whole book. My other favorite chapter in the whole book was there's this scene where there's a beautiful girl walking around in the dark. Oh, it was such. As soon as I got to that chapter that's near the beginning of the book, and I was like,
that's when I knew.
Yes, this is just such a. I love this
that
book.
chapter was when I knew that you would love this book.
And for the most part, all the loose ends, I would say, were tied up in the book, except for like what was presented at the end, like to set up for the second book. Except, unless I'm misinterpreting it, there's one loose end from the prologue, I think, and I really hope it comes back around later in the trilogy. Like, I really hope.
Yeah, the ending was awesome, and that's one of those things where you work your way through a novel, and this is a chunky novel. It doesn't look like it, but these are big pages, and it's 496 pages or something like that. So it's a lot. There's a lot here. You definitely get your money's worth. The ending is very satisfying. You're not quite sure how it's going to end. You know how you want it to end, and then the ending and then the epilogue, like after the ending, are very satisfying. And
the writing was beautiful, I thought, in the epilogue.
Yeah, in the prologue and the epilogue, she's a good writer for sure. Another thing that I want to mention just about the general like architecture of the story is that there's a real archetypal quality about this story. I like the way that the landscape here is used in a kind of classic. It has the feel of 1980s post-Tolkien fantasy with a twist, and Friedman does her own thing. But I like how
it's not cheesy.
It's not cheesy, and I like the way that she has created a wholly original story using traditional archetypes to make something entirely new. And I think that's how it's done. That's what I want to see. You have the warrior archetype, you have the mountains and the tower and the underground caverns and the star-crossed lovers and the damsel in distress and the journey east and the perilous ocean and the citadel. And you have all of these archetypes that really work well and are not
the hunting group of companions.
The story was based on archetypes, so it felt real and it felt compelling in the same way that the reason that Star Wars is so watchable is that it's based on Jungian archetypes and it's based on Joseph Campbell's monomyth. It felt like this was a very archetypal story, but everything was done in a very new way. It felt like she really gave us a new spin with those archetypes and made something new and really original and creative. And so I was totally impressed with that element of the book. This is a human story. There's a whole meditation that the author explores in this story of this question of just what makes a person human. The humans on Erna believe that what gives humans their humanity is that they're able to override their primitive instincts. So there's this whole like debate between the rocks and the humans about
because the rocks obey their primitive instincts, and they think
Right.
they're more connected to nature
Right.
and more civilized. Well, not civilized, but they're more pure because
Yes.
they don't separate their mind, body, spirit. Right?
Yeah, it's a very Rousseauian point. It's the idea that the reason that you human beings are sick, the reason that you're so depressed, the reason that you're having such a hard time is that you were born good, you were born this pure, noble savage, but this society, this overly rational world, this overly structured world, losing your baser nature has actually made you miserable and disconnected you from what it means to be a human.
Relating that back to the Fae, I really like that it's the female racks that can actually control the tidal Fae.
Yeah.
Because that is a very female thing, right? We have month, right? Because months follow the cycle of the moon, which is like 28 days, which is supposed to tie into like the female cycle.
Right.
And so it's the female racks who are connected to that lunar force, the tidal force. And so they're the ones that can control the tidal Fae.
Yeah. And the rocks are saying, you humans think that what makes you human and makes you special and makes you not like the animals is you've left your baser, primitive animal natures behind, and you think that you're all civilized and use your rationality. But you've actually lost something that's really important, and now you have things pulling you apart in different directions. We're more whole. At one point, this rock woman tells Damien that the rocks aren't mentally ill. They don't manifest vampires. They aren't tortured at night by werewolves and scary demons. The reason
they weren't there until the humans got there.
That's
the vampires,
right.
The
That's
werewolves,
right. The reason that you are so miserable is because you've suppressed your baser nature. And so what the Fae manifests, the rock woman basically argues, is everything that you're repressing, everything that you're pushing down, that is what comes back to haunt you. So there's a sense there's almost a Freudian sense in which the rocks are these non-repressed, it feels like they're healthier in some way because...
Well, and that's also shown too when the humans use drugs, right, on the planet. So when they use drugs, it separates their mind really from their body, and so they have this outer body experience, which is very, very dangerous because they can become separated from their bodies. They can't get back into it. And that's a very human thing as well.
And I just like this idea, and I'd never thought of this way, that this old rock woman said that they end up traveling with. What's her name? Heseth? Mm-hmm. She says that you're actually not free if you're not in touch with your baser nature, because that baser nature is always screaming and yearning to be free, but you're repressing it, you're keeping it in a cage. And it also connects to this idea that, like David Hume talks about in Jonathan Haidt, that we like to think that we're capable, humans think that we're capable of separating our rational mind from our baser nature, and we can just we'll use our baser nature when we need to, when someone is threatening us, but for the most part, we'll be civilized and use our logic and our reason. But a lot of researchers are proving that that's not actually how it works, and that we're constantly making decisions at a gut level using our id, and then we basically use our reason to rationalize after the fact our gut level intuitions. So as David Hume says, reason is a slave to the passions. The rock understand that. The human beings on Erna do not understand that, and so they're torn, they're divided, and they're having a really hard time. So overall, a lot to like. There was so much I really enjoyed. And again, I'm a picky fantasy reader. So much to like here. I think we both agree about that. So let's get into a little bit of what we didn't so much like.
And while I thought the racks were super creative, and I like how she had their civilization structure set up really based on like animals and their instincts, I'm not a huge fan of having those like anthropomorphic animal characters in books. And one of the rock tribes was like kind of like humanoid lions, and when I was reading their parts, I just couldn't get the image of like the Cats Broadway musical out of my head for them. And so I'm sorry if I put that image into your head now, but I couldn't shake it.
Yeah, the rocks are like creepy cat people.
And there's like rat ones too. And,
Yeah, and I totally get what you mean about them looking like the characters from the Broadway show Cats. And once you said that, I could not stop thinking about it.
Sorry.
So I want to mention something too that actually was a major problem. You wouldn't think that it would be. You wouldn't think this kind of thing would be a big deal, but I thought that it was a big problem that there's no map in the front of this book. This book has no map in the front or in the back, and yet it would have been really helpful. There are multiple journeys. There are different regions that are important that the characters travel to, like the forest, where the Fae is more powerful and deadly. When Damien comes from his homeland of Ganji, you don't really get a sense of where he's coming from and where he arrives at. These different towns that are located closer to and farther away from the Fae, where the Fae is most concentrated. There's a canopy that surrounds this place called the Rocklands, and it would have just been really nice to get a sense of where you are in space, the kind of geography, where the characters are going, the kind of just the layout of the world. And I felt like some novels you can get away with it. You don't really need a map. The characters are going all over the place, and the geography really matters in this world. There's east versus west religions. There's north versus south in terms of how deadly the Fae is and stuff like that. This book really needs a map. So if there's ever going to be a reprinting, I feel like there needs to be a map, and it was a problem for me.
And maps are very important to the story as well. They have all these maps that they refer to. They have these Fae maps, and the Fae move like currents around Erna, so you get to see where they're most concentrated. It would have been really cool to see where the like tectonic boundaries are, because that's where like the Earth Fae are most highly concentrated as well. And another really cool thing is that the Earth Fae become diluted as they move through water. And so when you're over the ocean, even though like the crust is thinnest under the ocean compared to continental crust, the Earth Fae become diminished and you can't access them when you're over water, which is important. But the thing is, I think she did a very good job like describing where things were in reference to each other. I could see in my head where they were going, but I do agree that it would have been helpful. Okay, so another problem that I had with the book was Siani's character. We met her and I was so excited. I'm like, she is going to be this awesome, badass character. She has all these powers. And, you know, something happens with her and she gets a little weaker. But overall, her character just completely diminishes as well, and she becomes paper thin. And I was really disappointed with her character as we moved on. And I've heard some other complaints that people pointed out that Damien didn't have a good reason for going on the journey. So Damien thought he was in love with Siani, right? He wasn't sure, but he wanted to help her. He wanted to save her. And I think that's the reason he went, because he's like the white knight. He's the hero figure. He wants to do good. He thinks of himself as that hero. He can't sit still. And so he yearns for adventure. And I think that's actually why he goes on the journey. He's not in touch with his emotions enough to even know whether he's in love or not.
Yeah, and I actually agree with you. And so for me, I'm not upset that, well, Siani was this very powerful character and then she became not powerful. Tragedies happen to people. People become weaker for various different reasons. When there's an attack or when something happens, sometimes you lose your powers. What the problem for me is that I felt like Siani was pretty well fleshed out. You were getting to know her. She was interesting too because she was a lore master, not just an adept. So she had these powers, but she also ran her own business. She was a very sort of confident, competent, knowledgeable character that was seen as a kind of community resource. People relied on her. And about a third of the way through the book, she loses that entirely. And she is empty for the rest of the book.
Yeah,
and
her personality goes away too. And maybe that's part of it, but I just thought she's very, very empty.
Her, and that's the thing is that, I don't want to give away spoilers.
Yeah,
but
try not to say it particularly.
But based on the logic of the book, she should not have lost her personality.
Right.
She lost other things, but anyways, I can't say too much about that, but I just want to say at the outset of this story, I was really excited about Siani because she was a great character. she really had a wit about her too. I found myself wanting to get a beer with her, right, and or wanting to like visit her shop. I kind of found myself missing Siani throughout the rest of the story, and I thought that took the story down a notch for me. Another thing that I didn't love, this is kind of a taste thing. Nikki didn't necessarily feel exactly the same way as I did, but I did feel like there was a stretch of about 70 pages, starting around page 280, and then going on for about 60 or 70 pages that were really dry for me, that kind of dragged a little bit. But in comparison to other fantasy novels, Robert Jordan, right, in my opinion, Brandon Sanderson, it wasn't that bad.
So we all have different tastes, and I thought there was absolutely no part of this book that dragged. It moved really fast for me, and I devoured it. So I'm going to have to respectfully disagree.
Another thing for me is, and this is just a personal taste thing, totally personal taste, is I wish there were more politics. The author sets up this beautiful world of intrigue and warring religious sects and powerful institutions and a complicated history and heathens who worship demons versus the church that wants order. And Damien's church sect is different than the patriarchs. And you get Siani again, who is this powerful adept, and Damien's the warrior monk, and there's this whole world that the author builds with hedonistic pleasure temples and women being preyed on by creatures of the night and Jagannath and all of this stuff. And then she basically leaves it behind, and all of the characters go on a journey, a traveling journey with their hunting group of companions. And so she weaves and ensnares us in this whole rich, textured world with all of these institutions and politics and debates and things like that. And I'm thinking the whole book is going to be like that. And then it turns into this traditional fantasy journey. So if anything, and again, I'm a big fan of kind of Game of Thrones style fantasy. So I wanted more of that. I wanted to stay in Jagannath for longer.
But she leaves that open for exploration in further books.
That's true. And I'm hoping in the second and third books that she returns to that, because I think she's good at it.
All right, so what we did for the rating is Jordan rated it on his own and I rated it on my own. And for each category, actually, we were pretty close to each other, which was surprising.
Remarkably close.
Yeah, so we just averaged out our scores, basically. All right, so for story, we rated a 9 out of 10. Like, I thought there were no draggy parts in the story. I felt totally satisfied with it and just super enthusiastic for book 2. Like, I thought the setup was great. And I can't just even say how much I loved the ending. I really did. I thought it was a fantastic ending, because it's really disappointing when the ending is a letdown. That is not the case here. Not at all. Characters were rated a 7.5 out of 10 because some of the characters felt more fleshed out than others. Like, I love Gerald Tarrant's character. Like, I think he's so interesting. I want to learn more about him. I'm pretty sure the novella prequel is about him, which would be really fun.
I like Damien, and we always have this debate, even when we're watching Buffy. Like, I like Riley, good old-fashioned American boy, firm principles and values, whereas Nikki likes Spike, who is this, libertine, like, punk vampire, and Angel, who's this dark, brooding, sexy, hunk of meat. And she just likes these dandy, like, libertine guys that are, like, super pale and are tall and dark and handsome, tall and pale and handsome, and who just are really seductive with women, whereas I like Damien, the big tough guy with the broad sword. And
Damien's kind of a tool.
Damien's kind of a tool, but we need people like that in this here world. And so I like Damien more than I liked Gerald, but I understand why you like Gerald.
I thought that Zen's perspective was a little weak when you're reading his parts, but otherwise I really loved the Zandu perspective, where it
cool.
got its connection with Heseth.
That was so cool.
That was just, she did that really well. Like, when you get the different demons perspectives, like, all of that came together really nicely. Even the patriarchs, I felt like I got to know his demons.
The patriarch
really
was awesome because he was this man of principle, and he's running the church, and he doesn't believe that the faith. They kind of like a little debate like you have in Lord of the Rings, where should I use the ring or should we throw the ring into the volcano? Damien is like, we should use the Fae and figure out how to manipulate it for our own ends to keep ourselves safe and progress. And the Patriarch is like, no, we can't use the Fae, but secretly we get access into his mind, and he's tempted.
Yes.
He's tempted to use the Fae.
Especially as he nears the end of his life.
So first half of the book, awesome character building.
Yeah.
You're inside the characters' heads. You're feeling their stresses and anxieties and hopes and worries and fears and all of that. And I feel like the second half, that's why it gets a 7.5 out of 10. Is I feel like she lays a base for the characters, a foundation, and then she kind of gets away from that a little bit to focus on the action.
And I know this would have been really hard to do, but I would have liked to see Haseth's perspective too. You didn't get her perspective.
Yeah, me too, because she was a good character, even though we only knew about her really from the outside.
Okay, so next is prose. And prose we rated an 8.5 out of 10. So overall, I thought the prose was good and at times absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And then there were other times where there were some tired phrases that were repeated. And the one that got me the most was skin crawl. It was used a lot. And it kind of made my skin crawl a little.
Okay. Yeah. Overall, though,
overall, the prose was really nice.
She is a really impressive prose stylist. And there were times when she would get on a roll and you'd have 3 straight chapters that were just like poetry, just straight fire, just beautiful. This woman can write. I'm not kidding. I mean, there are chapters in this book that are about as good as it gets when it comes to fantasy writing, in my opinion.
And for a fantasy book that accomplishes so much, it is fairly lean. It's not often that you get a fantasy novel under 500 pages that does this much.
Right.
It's satisfying in that way too.
And I'm going to say something controversial here,
rewarding.
But a lot of my friends and a lot of my sort of fellow travelers in fantasy and sci-fi love Robert Jordan, right? And have read all of his books. I'm going to say I think Celia Friedman is a better writer, just in terms of prose, than Robert Jordan. And as Nikki pointed out, Celia Friedman can do what it takes Robert Jordan to do in 800, 900 pages. She can do this in 496 pages, and there's more in here. So bravo, kudos there. That was really impressive.
I can't say anything there. I haven't read Robert Jordan, but
she's better. She's better. Sorry.
I'll take your word for it. So next up is originality, and the originality here was fantastic. We rated it a 9.5 out of 10. The magic system was just absolutely phenomenal. I love how she related it to energy, and it can be controlled by brainwaves and thoughts, and it was just, the world was creative, and it has that like sci-fi element to it. I loved all of it.
Very much like, and I know Brian Lee Durfee said something similar to this, it does feel very much like a combination of Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, because it's in the future like that. Dune, okay, because it's got science fantasy and there are elements of, well, we're in the future, we're not using technology as much, and the world, there are some aspects of the world that
and
feel
as
similar.
I'm still reading The Expanse, Erna could be one of the worlds in the Ring Gates. Seriously.
Yeah. Oh,
maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Connection.
Absolutely. So it reminds me, it's like a combination of, the Book of the New Sun, Dune, and Lord of the Rings, but it's also super original and it's its own thing. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to categorize it.
And so that brings us to world building. And world building, we also rated a 9.5 out of 10. And really, personally, I took a half point off because there was no map.
There was no map. Yeah. I actually
probably would have gotten a 10 if there was a map.
Yeah.
So, and also with the world building, I just wanted to point out there's this town on the outskirts of the canopy, okay, where like the Fae is not really controllable, called Satin, or maybe Satan. It's Sattin. And I thought it was really cute that it was kind of like Salem. Like they had these little like kind of gag shops, like get your fortune told, and I liked that, and all these little different colored twinkly lights.
I liked the island of Morgoth, and I liked that whole
that was really
chapter. Cool. Morgoth, by the way, isn't that a little reference to Lord of the Rings?
All right, so overall, this book gets an 8.8 out of 10, which is really good.
That is a good rating for us. Really impressed by this book. So happy that I read this. And I think Nikki is actually going to move on now to book number 2, When True Night Falls. I'm going to be reviewing Book of the New Sun, and I'm going to have a conversation with Christopher Rocchio about Book of the New Sun on this channel. He's something of an expert. He knows this whole world a lot better than I do, so we're going to have a really nice conversation about that. But I think Nikki's actually going to go on and keep reading.
But I'm not giving up on The Expanse. I have, what is this, book 7, Persepolis Rising, I'm going to review first.
Yep.
And then I get to find out what happens in When True Night Falls, and also I'm going to be really nice to myself and move on to book 3 right after this. So I'm going to do 2 and 3 together.
Excellent.
And so look out for that, everyone. And as usual, please, if you're interested in keeping up with our content, subscribe and hit that notification bell. And also find us on Patreon. We're patreon.com/iWizard.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.